For questions 16, 17, 19, and 20, we're trying to find the domain of the function. So with 16, we have a fraction, and we cannot have 0 on the denominator. So what would make this denominator 0? That would be negative 2. If you plugged in negative 2 here, negative 2 plus 2 is 0. So x cannot equal negative 2. So in interval notation, this could be negative infinity all the way up to negative 2, and then negative 2 all the way to infinity. So it's really just negative 2 that you need to exclude. Everything else is okay. For 17, it would be 3 that makes this 0. So x cannot equal 3 because that would make this denominator 0, and you can't divide by 0. So our domain includes everything except for 3. So negative infinity all the way up to 3, and it's 3 with a parentheses because we don't want to include it. And then 3 all the way to infinity. Question 19, there's a lot going on here because we have a denominator and we have a radical. So the radical, that can be 0, it can't be negative. So what would make the radical 0? That would be 2. So x has to be greater than or equal to 2. Now looking at the denominator, it can't be equal to 5. So x cannot equal 5. So with interval notation, we need to say it needs to be bigger than 2, but it can't be 5. So 2 is our starting off point with a bracket because it can actually be 2. And we're going to work our way to the right all the way up to 5, but it can't be 5. And then starting back up after 5 all the way to infinity. And that would be our answer. So bigger than 2, anything bigger than 2 except for 5. That's essentially what that's saying. Here we need to be bigger than negative 2 because negative 2 would make that 0. So x has to be bigger than or equal to negative 2. And then we also need to exclude 3 because 3 would make that denominator 0. So it has to be bigger than negative 2, and you also need to exclude 3. So we're starting at negative 2, and we're putting a bracket because we're including negative 2. And we're going to work our way to the right all the way up to 3. We're not going to include 3. We're going to start back up at 3 and then go all the way to infinity. So if you were to say this in words, you would say numbers that are bigger than negative 2, or it can equal negative 2, but then anything except for 3 that's bigger than negative 2.